to you by People G2, a nationwide leader in background checks and employment screening solutions. People G2 gives their clients access to the best human capital management and due diligence tools available. They are dedicated to helping their clients with all of their people-related decisions. To learn more, go to www.peopleg2.com. Talent Talk centers on the topics of talent recruitment and management, leadership development, company culture, and employee engagement. These are all timely topics for CEOs, entrepreneurs, HR professionals, and business leaders. We hope that as you tune in to listen each week, whether to the live broadcast or to the podcast on iTunes or iHeartRadio, that you hear something you can take away that will help you grow and impact your career in a positive way. And now, here's the host of the Talent Talk Radio Show, the founder and CEO of People G2, Chris Dyer.
Well, for one last time, happy Tuesday, everybody. This is going to be the final Talent Talk ever. And after 9 years of doing a show nearly every week and speaking to generally two people almost every week, talent leaders, CEOs, executives, authors, consultants, thought leaders, you name it, we have decided that all good things must come to an end at some point. So I've asked Paul Roberts, who is our producer of the show, who owns the radio studio where this whole thing started and has been on every single show
one way or another
as well, one way or another, to join me here as my final guest to help me sort of, I guess, remember this show and to
wrap it up in the only way possible. You know, when MASH went off the air after 11 years of whatever, they had a final episode, as did all these other iconic shows. You are an iconic show. You've been doing this how many years now? What did we figure out?
9 years.
9 years. Who else has been able to claim that? 9 years of continued conversations here about a field. I will tell you the truth. When you first started the show, I thought, how long can you do this thing? How many conversations about talent can you talk about before you're doing the same thing? And yet I can honestly say in 9 years, I heard themes. I heard people hitting the same note, but I never heard the same song played twice. I heard everybody had a different opinion and a different outlook. I found it to be a fascinating discussion about a topic I knew very little about.
Well, so let's go back to the beginning, right? Which was I was on Rick Franzi's show at your studio, and I came in, and I think you said, that stuff you're talking about, that talent stuff, that's interesting. You should have a show, here." And I went, "That's interesting." But I'm not a radio guy. I got a face for radio, but I don't think I don't know if I'm a radio guy. And I went back to my staff. And I said, I was on this show and I met this guy, Paul, and he said I should have a show. And I said, it's just a stupid idea. And they went, no, you need to do this. And I'm like, why? It was one of those moments where, like, when other people are telling you to do something and you don't get it yet, and you're like, okay, let's just assume I'm a maybe. Why should I have this show? And they would say, you go to these conferences, you talk to these people, you read the books, and we get to hear the things you're excited about and the things you learn, but like you ought to be talking about it, to a larger audience.
Sharing it with the world,
Right. And I went, well, that's an interesting perspective. And I thought about it some more. And so we said yes. This was, the beginning of, I think, one of the best things that I ever learned was to say yes to things, especially when they come around and you don't expect them.
Right.
So the first problem was, could we get anybody to agree to be on the show?
Right. Brand new show. Who's ever heard? And it's a topic. I think one of the reasons this show succeeded so well and lasted so long is, surprisingly, there aren't many people talking about this topic, at least from the perspective you take on it.
Yeah. And there's probably a lot more now. We've certainly, podcasts have exploded, but I just remember being absolutely terrified that we were never going to find, can I find 10 people like right now, just to even get it going?
Yeah, right.
And then how in the world am I going to get 2 people to show up every week?
Yeah.
To be on this show? And I thought, this is to your point, this will be a fun thing for a month or two.
I thought it would last the
probably,
summer, and it'd be a cool
right.
conversation, and we'll exhaust it after a couple of months here. I didn't know 9 years later we'd still be rolling on this thing here.
So I went back to, okay, who are the coolest people in my network that have something to do with talent, that can have an opinion on this topic. And we always say someone who's uniquely talented or someone who really deals with talent. They tend to be kind of one and the same. And my first guest was Kim Shepard, one of my mentors, who I then later on wrote a book with, and she's been on the show many times. Got her on, and we had other people come on. And then what we found out was, so then second problem, will anybody listen?
Yeah,
will
that's
anybody
right.
tune in?
This would be fun for us, but who's going to listen to this? Yeah.
And to our surprise, the amazing people that agreed to be on the show brought their networks with them.
That's the key. And I'll tell you, to me, the epiphany was, it went on like that for months. And I thought, okay, this is cooler than I thought. This has got a lot more areas of conversation than I thought, because you guys get into this whole idea of company culture and this whole idea of the complexities of hiring today and retaining talent, and what is it? We don't live in a command and control world. Just do the job, and when you do, I fire you and I get 12 other people. This whole evolution that's happened in the way companies hire and train and build company culture. So all that happened. But to me, the eye-opener was when you transition from your Rolodex to people you'd never met before here.
Yeah.
That was a big moment. Would people, it's one thing, okay, I know Chris, and this will be fun, and I'll support him, and it'll be interesting. But at some point, you start reaching out to people, and I don't know if you remember that, but I remember we sort of had a conversation. You're like, I'm sort of running out of people in my Rolodex here. And I said, well, why don't you think bigger? Why don't you I remember saying to you, why don't you get Southwest Airlines? And maybe I'm exaggerating because I'm Irish, but it was almost like, they're not going to come on our little show. I said, you don't know. You don't know. And suddenly through LinkedIn and some other people, you're reaching out to people you had no idea. And I remember you had the HR director for Southwest Airlines.
Twice. We had the head of people twice, two different, people from Southwest Airlines come on, and they've told some amazing stories.
Yeah.
And so I think, this is a lesson for anyone who wants to do something, just start. Right. That's the first thing. Just try to do it. And we did it as best we could. The early episodes are barely listenable. I'm pretty terrible. My guests did most of the work.
Right.
And, I remember I had a script, and
you came in like, I said, no, Chris, just talk to him here. No, I got to have it all figured out.
You had it all figured out. And then later on, once I could just do it, I didn't even look at the script. I could just do it with my eyes closed, but,
right.
And it was funny. The guests came in. They wanted the questions in advance, and they came in with their scripts. And then as we sort of learned how to evolve out of that, the episodes got better. And we were able to take then those examples and go back to people. And this was another thing that I learned. It was a big kind of epiphany for me when we transitioned to those people we didn't know, was how special the guests felt that they were being asked to be on a show.
Yes.
And that they were being asked to give their opinion, and that they could be given this recording, later on video, of their talk that they could use for their own network, their own people. And 90% of them never asked me any of the questions I thought that I was so worried they would ask me about.
Yeah, right. How many people listen, and where does this play, and all this? So I don't know. I'm the head of some giant company. I'm not sure I'm going to agree to be on this thing until you tell me all the demographics and everything.
Right.
No, they were just thrilled to be part of it and to get a copy of it.
Right. And over the years, as more podcasts popped up, people that equation changed, and people got a little more savvy and asked more questions. But by then, we had built a really big audience.
Yeah.
We had a really good following. And it was totally different by then. So I think it was really easy back in 2013 to think about, how do we get from starting to where we are today as we close the door?
Yeah.
But that wasn't the right way to think about it. It was, how do we just get some episodes under our belt?
Exactly.
And do we like it?
So think back to my favorite joke is, I'm a good Irish Catholic, so I pretend that I'm like John the Baptist wandering the desert for 10 years saying, something's coming, podcasting. And nobody would listen to me. And now I'm the mad prophet because everybody's got religion. Everybody's discovered that this happened. back then, and when we started, there were about 250,000 podcasts total on iTunes. That's the only way we could measure how many there were, how many iTunes was carrying. Now there's 100 other platforms other than iTunes. But in those days, it was really just iTunes, and there were about 250,000 regular podcasts. Now there's 2.5 million podcasts on iTunes. It's exploded since then, more so in the last couple of years. And this whole idea of content marketing, of telling stories, not just once, but over and over again, to building an online campfire where people can gather to check in and geek out on some little niche conversation like you built around the most unlikely of topics, I thought, talent. Why did talent resonate with such people? Why is that still such a confusing and huge topic of conversation?
Yeah, I think that, why is SHRM one of the largest conferences in the world, right? I mean,
right.
What is best practices is always evolving to get better. So much like science and education, right? This is a group of people who are always trying to get better.
But is it the complexity of it? Because obviously there's more regulations and rules and litigation and issues that have popped up. It's not just a million years ago, my late aunt was in charge of personnel. That's all it was. You just hired people and you processed their check. There wasn't much beyond that.
Yeah. So there's the complexity of what's best, the best practices from subjective, like how do you be a good leader? How is your culture good? Right. That's always an evolving conversation. And just on that, we had enough to talk about.
Right.
But then there's the changes in the law. There are changes in, what is the right thing to do. There's an evolving conversation.
Can you say this and you can't say this? And how do you accommodate a diverse workforce and multi-generational workforce and all these things? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's the evolving economic, sort of outlook. So is this a time when it's hard to hire or a time when it's easy to hire? Is this a recession or not a recession? I mean, there's all these different complexities about what's happening from an economic perspective that impact employers and talent leaders. And then there's people who had released books that had new ideas and new things to share that we brought on. And that was really important. But, before I get to some of those, I think one of the other things that I've learned, I'm just going to give away all my secrets.
Okay. This is the last show, so you reveal it all
my secrets away. Is people often ask me how in the heck I had time to do a show.
Yes.
And how did I consistently be able to do that? And that is...
And I'm going to stop you for 1 second because it's the number one reason podcasts, not only on our channel, but worldwide fail. They think it's fun. They start a few episodes and they realize this is a lot of work because it's a continuing conversation. It's a weekly conversation. And it goes from being a joy to being a grind, and they give up.
So I realized in this podcast, what I'm good at is showing up and having the conversation. What I don't like doing, or what I'm not good at, is chasing down the guests, preparing the questions, getting all the information together. Like, that part was grueling. And so I pushed that off. And so first it was Mike Bankhead who helped me do it. And Mike has excelled through my organization. He's now running our sales team. And, back a long time ago, he was helping me with scripts. And then it was Sarah Blake who helped me for many years. And then it was Angela Collins. And so I could not have done this without them being a part of doing the stuff that needed to get done. Right. And allowing me just to show up on Tuesdays at about 12:55.
Always. We're all like, is Chris here? Is he coming this week here? Every week it was a question if Chris is coming here. And then the clock would tick, and there he was. Yeah. There he was.
Yep. And I had to just show up and do my thing. And I think that was another part that allowed us to do this for 9 years.
Yes.
Was that I outsourced the parts that I wasn't passionate about, that I didn't want to do. I still was collecting, guest ideas. I was still part of that conversation. We would still talk about who we wanted to go after and who we wanted to, invite to the show. But the minutia of that.
And that back end stuff is just as hard because now you've done the show. When I was in real radio 100 million years ago, when the show was over, it was over. Nowadays, with a podcast like yours, you got to edit it. You got to post it somewhere, and you got to write little show notes, and then you got to push it out. You got to do something with it. There's an effort after, not just an effort of getting everybody to show up. And I think that's, we tried to be your partner in that and help as much as we could in the back end press and the production part of it. It is a show. And I don't think people approach them as show. They just think it's like a Zoom call. They're just going to turn it on and start talking without any thought of what they're going to talk about, who they're going to talk to, and what they're going to do with this stuff afterwards. You guys figured all that out.
Yeah, I mean, in a little at a time, right? I mean, it was never, we didn't have all the answers all the time, but we certainly figured it out. And I think the good part was that we always could kind of dip into different groups at different times. We weren't always having CEOs, we weren't always having HR people, we weren't always having, but we could easily go to some of the best authors out there. I think we had Marshall Goldsmith on a couple times.
You had Marshall Goldsmith. I can't tell you how my email lit up and people like, how did you get Marshall Goldsmith, this giant author, this big, I guess, what does he does? He's a CEO coach for big,
yeah, like the top,
like Ford Motor and stuff like that. Yeah, big stuff, right?
Yeah, and how did I get him? I asked.
That's what I used to tell everybody, because there is an assumption. You started small. Who knows? There's a small audience, handful, hundreds, then a couple thousand or something. You built it up to a point. You had hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, you had a big deal going. I don't remember what the final numbers were, but you had a big, giant audience. Yeah. But it took a while to grow there. So in those early days when it's a handful or it's hundreds or it's 1,000, there is an assumption they're not going to come on my quote-unquote little show. And I'd say, you never know. One, because you're talking, it's not just about how many people you reach, it's who you reach. And I got to believe, we never did a complete survey of this, but the people that you reached, partly because of the people you were talking to, had to be a very elite group of people. I'm assuming.
Well, maybe. I mean, I wanted to talk to people that I found interesting that had something to say. So I wasn't inviting anybody on the show that I didn't really want to have a conversation with.
Right.
And so I'm sure if I found them interesting, other people found them interesting. They had a big network. They had, people that inside their company or they were speakers and they were authors or whoever they were, they did come with an audience. Again, we mentioned that before, that was the big learning. I didn't have to build the audience myself. I didn't have to beg people to come and listen to my show.
Right.
I just had to get really great people who had an audience.
And they brought an audience. They not just brought you content, they brought an audience with them. Yeah, exactly.
And then those people, some percentage of those people said, well, this didn't suck.
Yeah.
And they stuck around, right? And they would listen to the next one. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten some random text or random email.
Yeah.
And someone said, boy, that was a really cool thing you said last week on the show. Or that was a really cool conversation. And I'm like, wait, what, you listened?
Somebody was listening? What? Somebody was listening. Yeah.
I mean, and I can almost predict it now with clarity. I know when we talk about something with a little bit of an edge or a little bit of controversy, that over the next week or so, I will get a couple hundred comments, whether text, email, IM, just through how I know different people, that they will listen and then they'll give their opinions and they'll talk to me. And that part always blew my mind, and then I think some of the challenges that we had was, to your point, we built an audience and we knew they were listening because we were getting just astronomical downloads across the different platforms, but we didn't know who they were unless they raised their hand, unless they came to me on LinkedIn or they emailed me or went to my website and said, I found you this way. We don't know who they are. So we're talking to people all around the world and we can see some of the demographic information, like what countries they're from and things like that. But we're also still, I guess it's just no different on radio. You don't know who you're talking to on the radio, FM radio or AM radio.
Right. Traditional over-the-air radio is the same thing. When I was in radio, I knew people were listening, but many of the night I was a late-night DJ, WMYK, K94 back in Virginia, and all of a sudden I'd say, is anybody listening? Call. You felt very lonely. You're just talking. Am I talking to myself or is anybody really responding? And then people would call or they'd run into you later and say, I listened. It's amazing. I'll tell you the three things that I always tell the story. You don't even know this, but I'm going to share this today here in the last episode. The three things I always share about your story is, I said, one, I thought this is a topic that, as I said, that didn't have legs. I couldn't imagine that we wouldn't run out of things to talk about. One, and you never did. because of the importance of it, the breadth and depth of it, and I think maybe the breadth and depth of your interest in the topic. You weren't just talking to CEOs, just talking to HR directors. You're talking to a variety of people. That was one. The second was, as I said, when we pivoted from people you knew, kind of local people, to this national and international audience. Talk about that for a second. You got the biggest names in the HR business. Here's a couple that just I've always quoted. You had the HR director, or whatever he calls himself, for General Motors. General Motors worldwide on your show. You had HR director for Sears, Vans, Lockheed Martin. I was trying to go through a list of them. Big name companies. And
Islands, well, who else?
Jet Propulsion Lab. I remember they were on once. Something here. Somebody.
Yeah.
A huge list of giant. In addition to other local people, interesting people, authors and stuff, the biggest names in the business. Why? How did you get? Because everybody's amazed at the list, the who's who list of people that you've gotten. And I think I asked you once, how you doing this? You went, I just go on LinkedIn and I say, hey, I have this show, and here's some of the people we've talked to, and would you like to come on? So was it just that innocent, or was there something more thoughtful? What could you share to people who want to get bigger guests? Because you got the biggest names in the business effortlessly. It almost seemed like.
Well, so we made it look effortlessly, but I don't think it really was.
No, I'm sure it wasn't, right.
So part of it was that we try to put our best foot forward every time. And so we did that by saying, telling them what was in it for them, right? Hey, we want to have you on the show. We want to talk about what's important to you, not what's important to me. What's important to you, that's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about, I also promised them, I won't talk about anything that you don't want to talk about.
Yeah, this isn't ambush journalism. You're not trying to create controversy and make them look bad.
I remember we had the head of somebody in HR from Taco Bell. We had it from another restaurant. And I remember at that time, there was some conversation, there was some things happening in the media, and they said, we do not want to talk about this, but we will talk about this. Sure, no problem, right? And so it wasn't gotcha. We weren't, so we were doing everything as far as they were concerned to make them look great, and to talk about things that they were passionate about, that they were experts in, so they were going to look good. I wasn't asking someone who doesn't know anything about, the laws and employment laws in Illinois to come and talk about that, where they're going to feel stupid or they're going to say the wrong thing. So we put people in this good light, like we were going to make them look great. And then as an example, we would list who we had on the show that we thought was awesome. And every week, every month, that list could change, as we might get someone a little bit more awesome to put on top of that list and take someone else off the bottom.
Right. So we want to add you to this list of awesome. We think you're awesome. We want to add you to that list. Right.
And then we would maybe send them our only one episode, like a example to like the best one we had, where things went really well, or it was really good, or eventually once we had somebody on with some pretty notable stature, we would use that as our example. So here we're trying to make you look awesome. Other people have been on the show and they didn't hate it, right? And we're going to work with you to make sure that you look great and you have.
But here's the key difference, and I struggle with it because I've been working with you and others now for 10 years, and I've done hundreds of shows through that, hundreds of different shows with some in case like yours. Not too many that had the length and breadth of your show here and achieved the kind of success yours had, but lots of shows through the years. And the key is to do that, to make them look good, and to have get them a chance to share what they want to talk about without it sounding like a commercial, without it sounding like an infomercial. Hi, Chris, how are you? Well, that's great. Okay, on to our next point here. You made it sound like a conversation. And I think it comes from the fact that you said casual. I think it's the key ingredient. You were genuinely interested. You came across, maybe you were great at faking it, but you came across as somebody who really enjoyed these conversations and asked, like if you met these people at a conference, you'd say, well, how did you do that? Why did you do that? Really? So it wasn't so much you were trying to get them to stumble. You were just trying to really, you were interested in them as people and what they were doing, and you're trying to really take advantage of this opportunity to talk to people you probably wouldn't otherwise ever get to meet.
Yeah. think that's I think that's a really important part that I wouldn't suggest anyone would do a show like this if it's not something that they would have done. Like there's not some element there that they would be doing anyway. So I said it 1,000 times probably that I would have had this conversation anyways.
Yes.
I would have gone to a conference and I would have pulled this person aside and I would have kept asking them questions until they ran away. You know, about why do you do what you do? So that's how I learned in the beginning. When I was just someone running a small company, that's how I learned. That's how I figured out what I needed to do next, what was coming, what was going to go on. And that was how I sifted through the BS too.
Right, right.
And I think I've told this story before, maybe on the show, but you know, I used to ask people, should you focus on your weaknesses?
Yeah, up until one of your last episodes, and that was one of your more controversial points. We're all taught in this society, find your weakness, spend a ton of time trying to fix that, and you're like, maybe I'm never going to fix that. Maybe I should just focus on what I do best, and I'll get more mileage out of that, and delegate what I do bad.
And what was fascinating is I asked all these super successful people, should I be worried about my weaknesses and try to get better at them? They would all tell me yes. And then I would ask them the follow-up, but do you do that?
Yes.
And they would all say no.
Yeah.
And it was like they didn't realize it. They didn't realize they were telling me something conflicting. It wasn't intentionally dishonest on their point. They were just reiterating what society tells you to do.
Absolutely.
Which is what we're here. And when I repositioned that, they realized, no, I don't do that. I have people to do the stuff that I don't like, and I outsource that, and I have people who love doing that kind of thing that I hate doing, and that's a part of my success.
Right.
And it was like learning those little nuggets, those little just gems, right, was enough for me to really grow as a leader and grow as a person. And I wanted other people to learn those things too along the way. And I that's what I hope. I always, said, hopefully you can learn something that you can use in your own career in a positive way. I mean, I really meant that because I was always finding little things that I could use.
So I'm going to acknowledge to you here today what I learned from you.
Right.
Because I was a young podcast producer, a young wannabe. I think podcasting is going to be huge. I think it's a new way of communicating. It's long form conversations, not short snippets like we were used to. It's a half hour to an hour conversation you're going to have with somebody where you can go really in depth. And it's an ongoing conversation. It's not once and done. So I'm going to come back again and again. Now we take it for granted. Netflix, you like this show? You got to see the next one and the next one and the next one. They start binging on them. But none of us knew what podcasting was when we started this. Is how long should it be? What kind of questions? Should it be talk radio and you got to really press these people and be controversial? Or is it just a fluff piece? Or is it something in between here? So one of the things that you taught me along the way here is how to grow and how to turn this into something bigger than I thought it was going to be. A conversation I thought was going to be a small niche conversation. It was only going to reach a few people and probably wouldn't have a wide audience or a wide selection of guests. You took it to another level. And in doing that, we learned some fun things along the way. And I'll give you one. I quote you this all the time. I remember at one point saying to you early on in the shows, you were struggling to figure out what to ask people. And I said, well, don't just ask them the standard questions. At the end, I always believe in asking some sort of change-up question. Ask them something that reveals who they are. Because I got to be honest with you, many of the guests you've had on, these are the most uptight people in the world. HR people, no problems here. We got everything answered. Nothing. We're not going to talk about any issues. No issues at our company. We got it all done. How do you get them to be real and to get past that veneer, that front that they're putting up? And I remember we had this conversation. You've probably long since forgotten it. And you're like, well, what do you want me to ask? I said, I don't know. Ask them what book they read. And I remember everybody thinking, who cares what book they read? But it'll get them to reveal something about who they are as a person. It's not frightening. You're not going to hold it against them, but they'll drop the corporate facade long enough to see who they are. And that became such a fascinating part of the show, such an unpredictable part of the show, that you ended up creating a book club with HR people. And I thought, now that's brilliant. Another way to connect with people in your industry because you're trying to sell them background checks and stuff. Hey, can I take you to lunch and tell you about what we're doing? No. How about being on our show? That's interesting enough. And then to connect with them again. Talk about that evolution of that whole topic. What book do you read? And then it turned out you were fascinated by what books they read, and it turned it into a whole nother thing. And then you ended up writing your own books out of it. That whole sort of innocent search for something other than the standard talking points turned into be, I think, one of the most powerful parts of the show, and maybe one of the most powerful things you got out of the show.
Yeah, so I think maybe not everyone would know this, but we did the radio show because we thought it would be a good outlet for me just to talk about the things that I was learning. We thought it might be valuable for our clients and for the community that we're trying to service.
Right. A way to meet people, start conversations, show what you
right.
know, show who you know, all these reasons people do content, right?
But I didn't expect it to have a impact on me personally.
Right.
And so I had, we did this for a while, and then knock on my LinkedIn door, a publisher came and said, "Hey, we want you to write a book.
Yeah.
We want you to talk about these stories that you have been collecting and you take maybe the summary of what you've heard and write a book about it." And I said, "Listen, I already didn't think I was a radio show host. I sure as hell I'm not an author."
Right.
And again, it was one of those moments like, no, take a step back, think about it, say yes, let's just do it and see what happens. And again, we wrote a book and it was really successful. And then I wrote another book.
Right.
And all of that came because we started this show, helped get that voice, get that conversation going, and allowed me to then become for lack of a better word, a thought leader.
Yes,
to be
exactly.
someone who people would turn to say, well, what is Chris saying about this? What is being said about this, in the space? And I had never intended that to happen. It was just, I don't want to sit and write blogs about this stuff. I'd rather just have a conversation with somebody.
Right.
And all these other great things happened out of that I never expected.
Well, I think, and for both of us, I mean, you certainly became, it got an audience, it became big. It was the biggest show on our collection of 20-some podcasts that we produce and stream live and call an internet radio station here. It took on an audience beyond Orange County, which I didn't anticipate. I thought these would be local conversations with local thought leaders. And through the years, you kept this willingness to evolve. Well, let's try changing the format a little bit. Let's change up the guests that we're getting in here. And then other doors opened. You're giving speeches. You're doing speaking gigs suddenly because you're a thought leader. You're writing a book because you're a thought leader. And in some sense, you were a thought leader because you were like a reporter out collecting the thoughts of others.
Yeah, and because I wasn't being, I think that wasn't my intention. Right? I didn't. Are you talking? Here we go. Yeah, because it wasn't my intention to do that. I wasn't using people to get content. I wasn't using people to get a book. I was just having the conversation, and it turned out that could be a good outcome. Right? So I think because I was trying to do something good, more good things happen.
That's a key thing. And I think too many shows come to me and they have it all. I'm going to do this because it's going to drive search engine optimization. It'll bring people to site, keep them there longer, bring them back more often. Yeah, it'll do all of that. Or I'm going to start conversations. It's a networking. It's a prospecting tool. I can't get a lunch with them or meeting with them, so I'll get them into the studio and they'll meet me face to face. And they have it all sort of figured out immediately what they're going to get. And the biggest shows, the best shows I think we've done through the years have been more like yours, like, I don't know. I'm really open to see where this goes and put some time and effort into it, see if I'm any good at it, see if anybody likes what we do. But it comes from a genuine curiosity. You can't be a good host if you're not honestly interested in meeting these people and talking to them. And I think you were and still are.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think it'll be interesting to see, what do I do with this extra time?
Yeah. So that's the question. So obviously through the years, you did sell the company and you wrote a book, you gave lots of talks and other things here. Now it seems like you're kind of in that next phase, like, what do I do next here? And I'm assuming you kind of, I don't know. What's next for Chris Dyer after Talent Talk? Are you still going to be in the talent field? Are you still a coach, a author, or are you pivoting into something? I know you love to travel. You're just going to travel the world here. What comes next for the audience? Everybody wants to know.
Yeah, I think the big one of the big impetuses for me to kind of stop the show now is that I'm being asked on such a regular basis to speak, that it became very, very hard for us. We started getting a little bit inconsistent with scheduling and being able to have a call or having a show every week, because I would be traveling or I would be giving a speech at a different venue or for a different group or what have you. And so I think that's sort of the next thing, is that I'm going to be using this time to hopefully be giving, larger keynotes to groups and to be able to keep the conversation going, but in a different way with a group of people, right? Whether that's at a large keynote for 5,000 people, or that's a small, company, meeting of 50 people or whatever that may be. And to have the conversation there, as opposed to, I guess keeping it going here, which is, I never thought it was going to last 9 years.
No, I admit now freely, I didn't think it would last 9 months, but I thought it was a conversation worth having that I found curious. I was curious listening. I thought, wonder if we could build something on that. There's a topic, everybody's talking about culture. Like you and I would have this debate. We both have different, I'm an older guy here, so culture, oh yeah, that's just the latest talking point, culture. Like anybody really believes this stuff. Oh, we got a great culture, but we'll fire everybody if we have to. I think too often it's just a buzzword that fills in the blank. It used to be, mission statement. Now everybody's got to have a culture, and they just check the box. But you honestly believe that, look in it, and have found some real substance to that conversation about culture. And that's become that's what you wrote your book around and all these other things here. I mean, culture has become more than just a buzzword, I guess.
Yeah. So it's still a buzzword, but there's a lot more people really doing something with it, right?
Right.
You could use the music as an example. There's a lot of people who can play guitar. There's only a few people who can play guitar really well.
Right.
But I think there's more people, at least in that mid tier, who are pretty good guitarists, who are still doing, they're not just pretending or not just playing 3 chords. Right. You sort of have people that there's been an expansion in this. And so, it'd be interesting to see what happens, because speaking of music, it kind of reminds me when COVID happened, I was playing in bands and I was doing stuff with music as well. And of course we stopped, right? Everyone had to stop. There was no venues. We all had to stay home. And I took all that extra time that I was spending practicing and writing songs and all that stuff, and I put it into other things. And what I got back was tenfold. Whereas with the music, it was limited, right? Unless you're touring the world, unless you're some big act,
right? Playing
music is pretty hard.
Hard life. Long shot.
It's a long shot, and there's not a whole lot of reward when you're in a bar with 10 of your friends who you basically bribed them with beer to show up. Right? It's not, it's not the life you want to be living. You're doing all these other great things, and you can't get 10 people to show up to a bar to listen to you play some songs. And so I'm wondering, now if this is a certain amount of time that I dedicated to this every week, and energy and thought, where can I take that now and maybe do something good somewhere else? I think I'd be interested to see where that takes me.
So last couple of questions and we'll wrap it up. You got to give me some funny takeaways. I'll start with 2, a good one and a bad one that I remember. I'll start with a bad one. I don't remember the guest. I wouldn't name them if I did. But we had a guest, and most of the time you've done these remote because you got busier. It was hard to get you to come down to our studio here. But in the beginning, you used to come down regularly, and we record them, stream them live, record them live. And there was a guest that came on, I don't know if you remember this one, and they wouldn't stop talking. You asked one question, and 20 minutes later, they're still talking. And they weren't in the studio, so they were like we used to use Skype in those days. And you looked at me, and I looked at you, and we both felt like we could walk out and come back in an hour, and they'd still be talking here. I don't know if you remember those kinds of guests or that one in particular, but I just smiled because it's like, wow. They just...
learning that as a real art and how do you interrupt somebody
Yeah.
without being rude. And I tend to not interrupt people. I mean,
Right.
I like to be a good listener, but I learned that people get nervous
Yes.
and they would keep talking. Now I remember, if we want to talk about bad guests, I won't say their name, but I do remember one guest that was so boring. They had the best resume, a really interesting story on paper, and we got them on the show, and it was like I would rather have watched paint dry than listen to them talk. It was so boring, and they were giving like one-word answers too at times. It was like, "So tell me about what you're doing." Working, it was like somebody that was so terrible.
All right.
How
Okay.
am I going to fill 25 minutes with this person? Oh my God, So yeah, we had a few of those. It wasn't always easy.
But learning how to have a conversation, I think, is a lost art. We aren't interpersonal anymore. We think of ourselves that, but we tweet, we send an email, we wanted a short summary, and yet this is old-fashioned conversation, the art of conversation. I think that's been lost along the way here for most people.
It has, and it's easy to say I can communicate well on social media or an email or on Slack, but can you have a conversation with someone that other people are going to listen to, that is engaging?
Yeah.
I mean, that was always a pressure. That was always a concern, is that it's bad enough if I have a bad conversation with someone that isn't very fun or interesting. There's people listening to this.
Yes, exactly.
Right. And so we have to think about that all the time.
Well, I think that you did that well. The proof is it lasted so long and built such a huge audience, and you got such big guests along the way here. I'll tell you the one that sticks out. I was trying to think back, which one of all the ones you talked to. I mean, I was impressed by General Motors and Sears and Vans and like all those ones we rattled off. But the one I remember the most, you'll never believe this one. It's the guy who wrote Turn This Ship Around. I've forgotten his name.
Yeah, David Marquet.
David Marquet, who's gone on to become pretty famous author and speaker. And as I recall, he was a submarine commander.
Yes.
And then he had to learn to motivate and run an organization. And he couldn't, I assumed it's the military. So he just yells at them and they do it. If not, you're court-martialed. It's command and control. We're in a submarine. And he said, but I couldn't fire them because I'm on a submarine. I can't say, you suck, get off the boat. So he had to learn to turn the boat around and to communicate in a way that motivated, that got people to do stuff other than just yelling at them. It's totally unexpected, and I'll never forget that conversation.
Well, and the other thing, too, that I think people don't realize is that, in a command and control, in a situation like that, where you're on a submarine, if you just do whatever you're told, that's a really dangerous proposition.
Yeah, right.
Because if he says dive and they don't say, excuse me, Captain, if we dive, we're going to hit the rocks and we're going to die. Right. If you don't have the ability, the guts, the practice, the know-how to say, no, sir, we cannot dive. Right. Or no, we cannot go up because there's a ship right above us or whatever. You need it's command. I think that's a big thing we learned from so many military people that we had on the show. In fact, I don't know if you remember, we had Kelly Perdue on. He was the winner of The Apprentice.
I do now that you mentioned that. Yes, right.
Before Trump was president, and he talked about his military time as well. And we heard this over and over and over again from military folks that it isn't command and control in the military. There are those moments,
right,
on the battlefield where that may be important,
right, where you can't question, just do it, go. Yeah, right.
But that is generally not how things work there. For that exact reason, is that you need to rely on people to tell you and give you feedback on whether that decision makes sense or whether or not it's going to get people killed. We can't just say, do what I say because I said so, when people have nuclear bombs on a submarine or holding a gun or a grenade or whatever. There's real life complications there, unlike our little trivial world of dealing with people, right?
Yeah.
Employees. I mean, this is a much bigger scale. I think we forget that as civilians.
And yet me too, we all want our employees to be robots. Just do it. Just do what I say. I'm not going to explain it. I'm not going to debate it. Just do the darn thing. And maybe there are times that's appropriate, but fewer and fewer. And that really was an epiphany for me. A guy on a submarine who you would think has complete control over these people. He said, I did, and that didn't work. I had to shift. I had to turn the boat around. I had to find another way to communicate with these people.
Yeah. And I think that's a really big lesson, and for me as a leader, I think I actually really enjoy anybody who does want to talk about it and does want to challenge me and does think there might be a better way, because if they have that kind of gumption and they have that kind of passion,
right,
I want to hear it, because either I'm going to learn something or they're going to learn something,
right,
out of that. And I think I get fearful of the leaders who don't want to have that conversation,
because I have nothing to learn from you. You're here just to do something. And I fear that more and more corporations are trying to turn people into robots. Everything's becoming automated and remote and distant. You were one of the first companies, still one of the bigger companies I've ever known, that embraced this remoteness early on, to trust their people, to let them work at home, that they're not screwing off and watching TV instead of doing something here. That was a whole interesting journey to watch. And because in the beginning, even to this day, you were pretty rare in doing it. Now it's become more commonplace. It had to be because of COVID. I wonder if that will evaporate and people will go back to collecting them and controlling them and telling them what to do. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think
time will tell.
Time will tell. There's always going to be people. There's always going to be crappy leaders. There's always going to be, someone trying to make a rule and put everyone in a box and try to make it work one way. That's always going to be something that's possible. But the good news is there's a lot more good leaders out there. There's a lot more good examples of what you should be doing. I think that there ever has been, and there's been a real shift. And maybe we won't get to experience it in our lifetime, but certainly our children and our grandchildren will probably see a whole nother sort of real change. Just the fact that how much has changed since the Industrial Revolution. It feels like we should have more progress than that.
Right.
But if you look at it, how quick things tend to move historically, a lot has really changed in a very good way in a short period of time.
Well, I always tell people, you're not going to hear another show like Talent Talk, not in my lifetime, not in a short period of time. You hit a note at the right time that resonated. You got an incredible selection of guests, and you approached it as somebody who was really genuinely interested in these conversations. Like, you do this whether anybody was listening or not. You were just generally interested to talk to these people and learn from them and to talk with them and share ideas, and that came across. So I always say to people, if you want to learn how to do this, and everybody suddenly wants to, 2.5 million podcasts now. There were 250,000 when we started. Everybody wants to do a podcast. There is an art to it, and it starts with the art of curiosity. It starts with the art of conversation, and then it starts with just exploring and seeing, let it find its own path, its own voice, as they say. You allowed that to happen, and I appreciate the opportunity to ride along all these years. So I just really am grateful we had to end it. You wanted to just sort of end it one day. Oh, no, we got to say goodbye, and I got to talk about this stuff.
Well, it's hard to say goodbye, I guess. So,
yeah, it's a master class. So you put on a master class of how to do this, and it was masterful to watch.
So thankful to everyone who agreed to be on the show, everyone who tuned in and listened, whether it was one time or every time. Certainly, again, to Mike and Sarah and Angela, who helped keep the ship moving from figuring out who we were going to talk to. And of course, Paul, you have been on, like I said, every episode, making sure we're on the air. And so thank you for everything that you've done. Like I said, we've done it in person, we've done it remote, we've done it in all these different formats and different programs, and been able to evolve over time. And so.
Well, I hope you'll come back at some time, and when it's appropriate, a year now, 2 years, maybe not another show. Maybe we can't. Maybe you can't recreate Seinfeld again. There's only one Seinfeld or something here. But if you find something, as the great Johnny Carson said when he left the Tonight Show, if I ever find something that I'm passionate about, want to talk about, I hope you'll come back and talk to us about it here.
Absolutely.
And share that, because it was fun to watch, and it was certainly one of those shows I'll always remember. It was one of our, certainly probably our most successful, one of our longest running shows here, and it evolved over time into something I look forward to each and every week. I'm going to miss you.
Oh, I'm going to miss you too, Paul. And everyone knows where to find me. So if you want to reach out, if you want to have a conversation, I'm still going to be having conversations. I just won't be having them Tuesday.
So how do they reach you if everybody wants to find you these days going forward?
Go to chrisdyer.com is the best place to do it.
DYER, chrisdyer.com. All right, thanks for riding along with us, and I look forward to hearing where it goes. It was a hell of a ride, and I'm glad we wrapped it up in the right style here. Thanks so much for all those years of Talent Talk.
Thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to Talent Talk Radio, brought to you by People G2. Okay.